presentation is Wittgenstein's 1929 lecture on ethics. Does Wittgenstein claim ethical judgments are meaningless? Wittgenstein's 1929 lecture on ethics presented to the Heretics Society at Cambridge University prompted a philosophical debate as to whether the early Wittgenstein believed ethical judgments are logically meaningful. The general disagreement is between those who believe he held all ethical judgments to be meaningless and those who believe he considered only absolute ethical judgments to be meaningless. The presentation will begin with an overview of cognitivism and non-cognitivism. The paper will then define ethics and articulate the difference between capitalizing the E as opposed to not capitalizing the E. The paper will conclude that Wittgenstein held a non-cognitivist position regarding ethics, and therefore that Wittgenstein believed that only absolute ethical judgments are meaningless. Lubbock defines non-cognitivism as a meta-ethical view which asserts that moral statements are neither true nor false because they lack descriptive meaning. Lubbock references Ayer as one who held a non-cognitivist view of ethics. Ayer believes moral concepts are unverifiable and empirically insignificant. According to Ayer, one cannot point to empirical evidence to justify moral judgments. Lubbock then places non-cognitivism in contradistinction with cognitivism. A cognitivist account of ethics, according to Lubbock, asserts that moral statements have the property of being true or false, but not both. He further describes cognitivism as a position which views moral claims which claims knowledge regarding moral judgments is possible. According to Atfield, G.E. Moore's theory of intuitionism is an example of a cognitivist theory of ethics. Instead of referring to empirical evidence to justify a moral claim, an intuitionist claims that moral statements are self-evident and known immediately. Atfield thus believes that G.E. Moore's moral philosophy is an example of a cognitivist theory because the theory holds that moral statements are knowable. As the paper will reference soon, the scholars Holliday, Lubbock, Brainhorst, and Flanagan all agree that Wittgenstein supports a non-cognitivist theory, but they disagree about its scope. Lubbock, Holliday, and Brainhorst argue that the early Wittgenstein believes all ethical expressions are nonsensical. Brainhorst calls this view the more traditional interpretation. Scholars who interpret Wittgenstein in this way often quote this passage from Wittgenstein's lecture. This running against the walls of our cage is perfectly, absolutely hopeless. Ethics, so far as it springs from the desire to say something about the ultimate meaning of life, the absolute good, the absolute valuable, can be no science. What it says does not add to our knowledge in any sense. This paper the quote will be referred as the Walls of Our Cage passage. In this passage, Wittgenstein doubts that one can have knowledge about the truthfulness of moral claims. Wittgenstein thus prima facie appears to be a non-cognitivist, but it is unclear from this passage alone whether he believes one cannot have knowledge about all ethical statements or whether one cannot have knowledge only regarding absolute ethical statements. In his article, Correspondence to Reality and Ethics, Brainhorst claims that the early Wittgenstein denies that any ethical expression has meaning. Brainhorst points out that Wittgenstein wrote as early as 1916 that ethics cannot be expressed. He asserts that Wittgenstein's 1921 Tractatus Logico Philosophicus provided the rationale for Wittgenstein's claim that ethics is meaningless. The Tractatus, according to Brainhorst, defined what is logically meaningful, and ethics fell outside the domain of significant language. Brainhorst asserts that the Tractatus informed Wittgenstein's 1929 lecture. Similar to Brainhorst's conclusion, Lubbock as well as Holliday argue that Wittgenstein believes all ethical statements are meaningless. Both Lubbock and Holliday quote the Walls of Our Cage passage referenced earlier, where Wittgenstein doubts one can have knowledge about ethical expressions. Furthermore, Holliday directly derives the title of his article, which is The Walls of Our Cage, Wittgenstein's Lecture on Ethics, from the often quoted Wittgensteinian passage. Lubbock argues that ethics is transcendental according to Wittgenstein. That is, it goes beyond the empirical world and as a result, language cannot be used to express meaning about ethics. Also, Holliday also argues that Wittgenstein believes all ethical judgments are nonsensical. He references the passage to summarize Wittgenstein's position that meaningful language only concerns the empirical world. Applying Lubbock's definition of non-cognitivism, Brandhorst, Holliday, Lubbock all conclude that Wittgenstein holds a non-cognitivist position towards all ethical judgments. But Flanagan disagrees, concluding that Wittgenstein only believes absolute value judgments are meaningless. Flanagan argues that Wittgenstein perceives ethics as inexpressible, but Flanagan clarifies that, properly speaking, Wittgenstein states ethics with a capital E in the absolute sense is unknowable. Absolute ethical expressions are undoubtable and prescribe that all people in all possible worlds should follow them. According to Flanagan, Wittgenstein argues one cannot have knowledge about claims of categorical necessity, reference on the PowerPoint, or ethical assertions in the absolute sense. After examining more closely Wittgenstein's definition of ethics, one will find Flanagan's conclusion to be a justified interpretation of Wittgenstein's lecture. Wittgenstein initially defines ethics as the inquiry into what is good. He provides examples of phrases one regards as constituting the subject matter of ethics. Flanagan, these phrases include the following: what is valuable, what is really important, and the meaning of life. These phrases, according to Wittgenstein, point one towards a rough idea of ethics. For Flanagan, it is unclear how such phrases resemble normative claims or expressions predicated by ought. Flanagan asserts, however, that Wittgenstein provides clarity by differentiating between absolute values and relative values. According to Wittgenstein, an expression is ethical or pertains to ethics if the statement is an absolute value judgment. He states that there are two kinds of expressions that have the appearance of ethical expressions. Some expressions confer relative or trivial meaning, but other expressions are ethical or absolute. This is the right road as an example of a relative expression because it is correct according to a specified goal or predetermined standard. The rightness of the road is relative to the goal of getting from one place to another within a certain time frame. Wittgenstein asserts one does not use relative expressions for ethical purposes. Rather, whenever one expresses an ethical phrase, one utters an absolute value judgment. If one discusses ethics, one discusses the absolutely right road or the absolute good. By indicating the difference between relative values and absolute values, the reader can infer that Wittgenstein is talking about ethics with a capital E in the absolute sense. Wittgenstein's claim that ethics is meaningless becomes clear when one considers his distinction between facts and values. Wittgenstein distinguishes facts from values and believes one can never infer values from facts. Lubbock indicates the importance of the fact-value distinction for non-cognitivist perspectives. The fact-value dichotomy allows non-cognitivists to declare that ethical expressions are pseudo-propositions because they are neither facts nor analytic statements. Flanagan asserts that the fact-value dichotomy frames Wittgenstein's entire argument within the lecture. The fact-value distinction is what principally supports Wittgenstein's conclusion, Wittgenstein's inference that ethics, in the absolute sense, is meaningless. Wittgenstein believes relative value judgments differ from absolute value judgments because one can assert a relative value, one can restate a relative value such that one asserts a fact, but absolute values can never reveal a fact. Relative value judgments can imply an is, but facts can never imply an ought. Wittgenstein describes an example to show that it is illogical to infer relative value judgments from contingent statements. Suppose a book accurately and exhaustively describes all facts about a murder. One may feel pain or outrage, but one fallaciously reasons from the mere facts of the book that murder is absolutely wrong. Wittgenstein writes, "Murder will be on the same level as any other event, for instance, the falling of a stone. Statements about murder have the equal possibility of being true or false, according to Wittgenstein, as statements about the falling of a stone." Holiday extracts Wittgenstein's general principle from the example and writes, "Propositions, no matter how important of a role some of them may play in our lives by comparison with others, are all from a logical point of view of equal value in being true functionally bivalent, that is, in being possibly true or possibly false." The book contains merely contingent statements, but does not claim that one should not murder. According to Wittgenstein, only factual statements express meaning and are propositions. Ethical expressions lack meaning because they entail no facts. Accordingly, ethical expressions are not propositions and do not have the truth values of truth or falsity. Wittgenstein thus supports a non-cognitivist outlook towards ethics. As Flanagan suggests, Wittgenstein's lecture pertains to ethics with a capital E rather than ethics with a lowercase e. Based on the works of Lubbock, Holiday, Brandhorst, Flanagan, and an analysis of Wittgenstein's lecture, Wittgenstein's argument could be put as follows. And as referenced on this slide, only facts express meaning. Absolute value judgments are not facts nor empirical statements and cannot be restated as such. Therefore, if ethical expressions concern only absolute value judgments, then ethical expressions confer no descriptive meaning. Flanagan's interpretation captures the possibility that Wittgenstein is open to an alternative definition of ethics that does not include absolute value judgments. Recalling the laws of our caged passage, Wittgenstein says that ethics is unknowable as far as it springs from the desire to say something about the ultimate meaning of life. If ethics is defined alternatively, as Flanagan suggests Wittgenstein does later in life, ethics possibly could express meaning. Thank you.